What if some of the healthiest veggies we could be eating vanished from our diets centuries ago? Back in the Middle Ages, farmers were growing 15 powerhouse plants, nutrient-packed superfoods that most of us have never even heard of today. Let's take a look at what we've been missing out on. First up, skirret. This forgotten root veggie was a star in medieval kitchens but has all but disappeared from modern farms. Unlike today's fussy carrots that need constant care, skirret was a low-effort dream. Once in the ground, it quietly multiplied, producing sweet, slender roots with barely any help from farmers. Think of it as a vegetable savings account. Just plant it and let the food pile up underground. What really set skirret apart was its flavor. Naturally sweeter than carrots or parsnips, these slender white roots were so tasty they found their way onto royal plates. In fact, medieval nobility loved them so much, they made sure skirret had a place in their palace gardens. Not many vegetables can claim a fan club that included kings and queens. But skirret wasn't just a treat for the elite, it was a lifeline for everyone else. In a time when winters were brutal and harvests unreliable, this resilient root kept growing. While other crops withered, skirret held strong, offering steady nourishment when little else could. Old farming manuals even called it the poor man's comfort during the cold, barren months. One of the most impressive things about skirret was its sheer versatility. Medieval cooks did it all: roasting, boiling, tossing it into stews, even baking it into sweet pies. Before potatoes ever reached European shores, skirret was the go-to root. It was the Swiss Army knife of vegetables, so useful it practically deserved its own family crest. But despite its value, skirret slowly vanished from our plates. As agriculture modernized, farmers shifted to faster-growing, bulkier crops, and skirret quietly slipped into the shadows of history. Meanwhile, another forgotten green was stealing the spotlight in medieval gardens. Originally brought to Britain by the Romans, Alexander's quickly won over local farmers. But this wasn't your typical tame garden herb. Alexander's grew like it had something to prove. Wild, bold, and hard to contain. It may have had the pushy persistence of a weed, but with a flavor somewhere between celery and parsley, it earned its place at the table. Think of it as the unruly neighbor who turns out to be a surprisingly good chef. So, what made Alexander's stand out? Pretty much everything. This plant was the medieval multitasker. Every part was edible. People harvested the young shoots and ate them like celery, tossed the flowers into salads, and crushed the seeds to use as a peppery spice. The leaves? They added a unique flavor, somewhere between parsley and celery, that gave soups and stews a distinctive medieval twist. And it didn't just taste good. Alexander's could grow up to 6 feet tall, with bright yellow flowers that drew in helpful pollinators. It didn't need pampering either. It flourished on windswept cliffs, along salty coastlines, and even by the roadside. It was the ultimate freelancer of the vegetable world. Never invited, rarely tended, but always delivering the goods. Despite all its versatility, Alexander's eventually slipped off the menu. By the 1700s, celery had muscled in and taken its place in gardens and kitchens across Europe. These days, Alexander's still grows wild in hedgerows and along coastlines, but most people walk right past it, never realizing they're ignoring a former culinary star. While Alexander's was out there growing wild and free, another medieval favorite carried itself with quiet dignity. Enter Good King Henry. Once one of the most useful plants in medieval Europe, it's now a forgotten gem, and honestly, it's overdue for a comeback. Unlike the unruly Alexander's, Good King Henry comes with a bit of mystery. No one's quite sure why it was given such a regal name. What we do know is that it was everywhere, sprouting up in both cottage gardens and in the wild, treasured for its reliability and usefulness. Growing Good King Henry is about as effortless as letting dust settle on a bookshelf. Once planted, it comes back year after year with zero fuss. If plants had resumes, this one would proudly list extremely dependable at the top of the page. Its nutritional credentials would make modern dietitians do a double take. Packed with more iron than spinach and loaded with vitamin C, it delivered the kind of nutrients medieval diets often lacked. And in the lean early months of spring, its tender new leaves weren't just welcome, they were life-saving. In the kitchen, it was a true multitasker. Cooks used the young shoots like asparagus, the mature leaves like spinach, and even the flower buds, which looked and tasted like tiny broccoli. Think of it as the original 3-in-1 kitchen tool. Only this one came from the garden and actually lived up to the hype. Good King Henry wasn't just a garden staple, it had medicinal value too. Its leaves were used to treat wounds, while a soothing root tea acted as a gentle laxative. In some places, it was even nicknamed All Good for its wide range of uses. But as farming became more commercial and focused on efficiency, this humble yet hardy plant gradually faded from the scene. Now, if Good King Henry was dependable, salsify was downright mysterious. Medieval farmers didn't quite know what to make of it. Was it a root or was it an oyster? Salsify's flavor is one of the most unusual in the plant world, a bit like someone showing up to a costume party dressed as seafood and somehow winning the prize for best costume. When prepared right, salsify genuinely tastes like oysters. This odd characteristic made it a prized vegetable in medieval times, especially for those observing religious fasting rules. In fact, 1400s monastery records show it was specifically cultivated as a meat and fish substitute during Lent. In medieval gardens, there were two types of salsify, white and black. Both had long, thin roots covered in dark skin that had to be peeled before cooking, sort of like the vegetable version of don't judge a book by its cover. Beneath that rough exterior was a hidden gem, a gourmet delight waiting to be discovered. But it was during winter that salsify truly earned its stripes. One of the few fresh vegetables that could withstand the cold, it stayed rooted in the ground even through freezing temperatures. Medieval folks would simply dig it up as needed throughout the winter months. Once harvested, it could be stored for months without spoiling. In a time before refrigeration, this made it an invaluable food source when fresh produce was in short supply. However, as modern farming shifted its focus toward faster-growing crops with more market appeal, salsify was left behind. Its slow growth and peculiar appearance didn't make it a top contender for commercial agriculture. Speaking of strange-looking foods, medieval diners had another treat that might make modern palates raise an eyebrow. If someone served a wrinkled, mushy fruit today, most people would politely turn it down. But back in the day, it was considered a true delicacy, well worth the wait. Enter the meddler. This curious fruit looks like a small brown apple with its bottom open to reveal 5 seeds. Right off the tree, it's rock hard and so bitter that it's practically inedible. But medieval gardeners knew its secret. The meddler had to blet before it was fit for consumption. Bletting is basically a form of controlled rotting, where the fruit sits around for weeks until it softens and turns a brownish hue. Medieval dessert menus must have been crafted by those with a lot of patience, and perhaps a lower tolerance for fresh, sweet fruit. Once properly bletted, the meddler transforms into a sweet cinnamon-flavored fruit with a soft applesauce-like texture, a treat medieval people absolutely adored. Cookbooks from the 1200s feature countless recipes for meddler tarts, jellies, and even wines, showcasing how much it was loved. Unlike salsify, which concealed its worth beneath a rough exterior, the meddler wore its oddness proudly. Its peculiar open-bottom shape earned it some rather colorful and often crude nicknames in medieval times. Let's just say the fruit's shape inspired more than a few jokes, many of which weren't fit for polite company. What truly set meddlers apart, however, was their timing. They ripened in late autumn, making them one of the last fresh fruits before winter arrived. After bletting, they could be stored for several more weeks, providing a rare, sweet indulgence during the coldest, darkest months of the year. Modern agriculture shifted its focus away from traditional crops like meddlers, favoring varieties that grow quickly and have longer shelf lives. Today's consumers prioritize perfectly shaped produce that's ready to eat, rather than fruit that requires weeks to ripen. In contrast, while meddlers demanded patience, the next forgotten vegetable in line was far too eager to please. Chickweed, unlike the finicky meddler, has no long history of cultivation. It was simply everywhere. This small-leafed plant, with its delicate white flowers, flourished in gardens, fields, and pathways throughout medieval Europe. Chickweed was like that uninvited guest who shows up at every gathering, yet somehow brings enough food to win everyone over. Medieval gardeners couldn't send out no chickweed invitations that actually worked. Farmers didn't plant it, yet couldn't stop it from growing. It thrived in any soil, sprouted in any season as long as the temperature stayed above freezing, and produced thousands of seeds from a single plant. Instead of treating it merely as a weed, medieval people recognized its worth and harvested it as a free food source. The tender leaves were available year-round in most places. Fresh chickweed contained 7 times more vitamin C than an equal weight of oranges. If vegetables had medieval titles, chickweed would have been crowned the royal provider of vitamin C. During times when other vegetables were scarce, peasants relied on it for everyday meals, and even noble households served it in winter months, when fresh greens were hard to come by. Beyond its role on the dinner table, chickweed had medicinal uses as well. Its cooling properties made it effective for soothing skin irritations, and a tea made from chickweed was often used to treat fever and inflammation. However, modern agriculture declared war on chickweed, using herbicides to label this nutritious plant as nothing more than a nuisance. As chickweed fought for recognition, another medieval vegetable suffered from an unfortunate name. Who would want to eat something called scorzonera? It sounds like an ailment, doesn't it? Sorry, I can't make it to work today. I've got a terrible case of scorzonera. Despite its unappetizing name, scorzonera was a staple in medieval gardens. The name comes from the Italian word scorzone, meaning venomous snake, as early herbalists believed the black-skinned root could cure snake bites. While that medicinal claim turned out to be false, medieval people discovered something far more valuable. Scorzonera was both delicious and highly nutritious. Often mistaken for black salsify, its close relative, scorzonera has a longer, straighter root with black skin and white flesh inside. The taste is milder and sweeter than salsify, with subtle notes of asparagus and nuts. What made scorzonera especially remarkable was its ability to be stored. After harvest in autumn, the roots could be buried in sand in a cool cellar, staying fresh until the following summer. Few other vegetables offered this kind of food security in medieval times. Cultivation records from the 1500s show that scorzonera was particularly popular in monastery gardens, where monks valued it for both its flavor during fasting periods and its medicinal properties. Medieval doctors even prescribed scorzonera tea for purifying the blood and calming stomach issues. The best part about growing scorzonera? You can impress your neighbors by casually saying, "I'm just heading out to harvest my scorzonera." It sounds like you either own an exotic sports car or are preparing to cast a spell. Unfortunately, scorzonera's popularity waned with the rise of modern grocery stores and refrigeration. As fresh produce became available year-round, vegetables that needed long storage periods fell out of favor. From its magical reputation as a snakebite cure to becoming a forgotten root, scorzonera gave way to more familiar options. Oddly enough, Welsh onions are neither from Wales nor true onions. They're like the medieval version of a knockoff designer product that somehow works better than the real thing. Welsh onions actually originated in East Asia, likely reaching Europe through trade routes around the 1200s. Medieval farmers appreciated this hardy plant, which provided fresh greens year after year. What made Welsh onions special? They're perennial, meaning once planted, they return every year without the need to replant. Over time, each plant multiplies, forming clumps that can be divided. One medieval gardening text even claimed a single Welsh onion plant could feed a family for 10 years through continual division. Welsh onions were incredibly practical, providing a reliable source of fresh green tops when other vegetables were scarce. Medieval cooks used the hollow green shoots to flavor soups, stews, and salads. Their most valuable trait, however, was their winter hardiness. In many parts of Europe, Welsh onions stayed green through all but the harshest winters, offering vital vitamins during the leanest months. They may be the only food to have an identity crisis of their own, neither truly Welsh nor a true onion, yet perfectly content with being exactly what they are. Medieval farmers cherished these dependable plants, but modern agriculture preferred larger bulb onions. Meanwhile, another plant was fighting for recognition. Unlike Welsh onions, which medieval farmers deliberately planted, fat hen simply appeared on its own. This wild green showed up in fields, gardens, and waste places across Europe, and medieval people were wise enough to eat it instead of pulling it out as a weed. Fat hen was like the uninvited guest who turns out to be an incredible chef. It crashed the medieval garden party but brought enough nutritional value that everyone forgave its intrusion. Recent studies have highlighted just how nutritious fat hen really is. It packs more protein than cabbage, more iron than spinach, and more calcium than kale. If medieval nutritionists had existed, they would have likely labeled fat hen as a superfood. The name fat hen comes from its role as poultry feed. Chickens that ate it produced more eggs and grew larger. If medieval vegetables had marketing slogans, fat hens would be Good enough for your chickens, even better for you. Archaeological excavations have uncovered countless fat hen seeds in food waste pits, indicating it was commonly consumed during famines. This wild plant often made the difference between starvation and survival. Cooking methods varied across Europe. Its leaves were boiled like spinach or used in salads, while the seeds were ground into flour during hard times. But modern farming declared war on fat hen, considering it a competitor to crops. In essence, we pushed a superfood out of our diets because it didn't fit the typical vegetable mold. While fat hen struggled for its moment in the spotlight, another herb was fighting to keep its culinary crown. How did a herb so versatile that it could flavor almost everything just vanish from our kitchen gardens? Unlike fat hen, which was never properly recognized, Lovage was once a culinary superstar that mysteriously faded away. Roman soldiers carried Lovage seeds with them as they conquered Europe, planting this powerful herb wherever they settled. Medieval monks continued the tradition, ensuring that every monastery garden had at least one Lovage plant. The flavor of Lovage is intense. Imagine celery combined with parsley, but taken to the next level. Lovage is essentially celery with superpowers. It's what celery would be if it got into serious flavor training. Medieval cooks used it extensively. One sprig could season an entire pot of soup. The dried leaves were sprinkled on meats, the seeds crushed into bread, and even the roots were boiled and eaten like parsnips. Perhaps most impressively, the hollow stems were candied as sweet treats. What made Lovage even more valuable in medieval times were its medicinal properties. The entire plant contains oils that help with digestion, reduce bloating, and act as a mild diuretic. Records from the 13th century monasteries describe Lovage tea as a remedy for stomach issues and kidney problems. A Lovage plant can live for 20 years and grow over 6 feet tall, offering an immense amount of flavor with minimal garden space. It's also incredibly hardy, surviving harsh winters and returning with vigor each spring. Medieval gardeners must have looked at modern gardeners in disbelief. You stopped growing a plant that flavors everything, lives for decades, and aids digestion? Did you replace your brains with turnips? As international trade introduced new spices to Europe, Lovage gradually faded from the scene. While Lovage slipped into obscurity, another forgotten green faced its own confusion thanks to its perplexing name. No, it has nothing to do with corn. Corn salad, unfortunately, has suffered from a naming mishap for centuries. While Lovage was forgotten, corn salad was misunderstood. The name corn salad comes from its typical growing location, in grain fields, which Europeans called corn, long before maize arrived from the Americas. These small, tender greens appear naturally in the fall after the grain harvest and remain green through the winter. It's like the quiet kid in class who gets overlooked because of a strange nickname, but turns out to be the most interesting person there. Medieval farmers discovered that these wild winter greens were not only edible but delicious. Corn salad has a mild, slightly nutty flavor, with none of the bitterness found in many other wild greens. The leaves could be harvested throughout the coldest months, providing fresh greens when nothing else was growing. Its nutritional profile would impress modern health experts. It contains 3 times more omega-3 fatty acids than iceberg lettuce and significant amounts of iron and vitamin C. Medieval people recognized its value as a fresh winter vegetable. Corn salad is probably the only vegetable to suffer from both an identity crisis and a public relations problem. It could have used a medieval marketing team to clarify, contains absolutely no corn. Modern agriculture, however, favored lettuce varieties with longer shelf lives and easier harvesting, pushing corn salad out of the spotlight. As corn salad faded from gardens, another bold-flavored medieval plant was rejected simply for being too intense for modern tastes. This plant, tansy, was a staple in medieval kitchens but has nearly disappeared from modern ones. Tansy grows as a bushy perennial with fern-like leaves and bright yellow button flowers. Every part of the plant packs a powerful aromatic punch, a complex mix of bitter, spicy, and slightly sweet flavors that medieval cooks craved. Modern chemical analysis has identified over 40 different flavor compounds in tansy leaves. If herbs were rock bands, tansy would be the one playing so loudly that the neighbors call the police. Medieval cookbooks feature tansy in everything from savory dishes to desserts. One Easter specialty, tansy pudding, combined chopped leaves with eggs, cream, breadcrumbs, and sugar, then fried the mixture into a cake. Tansy-flavored cheese was popular in spring celebrations, and even ale was infused with tansy for special occasions. Beyond its bold flavor, tansy had a practical purpose in medieval kitchens. Its potent compounds worked as natural preservatives, extending the shelf life of meats and baked goods, an invaluable trait in an era without refrigeration. The plant also played a vital role in medieval medicine, with tansy tea used to treat intestinal worms, digestive issues, and fever. Monastery gardens always included tansy for both culinary and medicinal purposes, often planting it near doorways where its strong scent could repel flies and other insects. Modern chefs would probably describe tansy as aggressively aromatic, the medieval equivalent of using all caps in your seasoning. As gentler herbs like parsley gained popularity, tansy gradually lost its place in kitchens. While tansy was deemed too bold, another forgotten vegetable faced the opposite problem. It grew wild, required no care, and yet we somehow forgot all about it. While tansy was too strong, sea kale was too easy to overlook. Growing along the coastal areas of northern Europe, sea kale was a valuable food source for medieval communities. This hardy plant thrived in the sandy, salty soil where few other edible plants could survive. Sea kale was like that friend, who always brings food to the party without being asked, but somehow never gets invited to the cool gatherings. Medieval people harvested it in two ways. Young shoots in the spring were blanched and eaten like asparagus, while mature leaves were cooked like cabbage. Unlike many wild foods, sea kale had a mild, sweet flavor. What made it especially valuable was its high vitamin C content, 6 times higher than lemons by weight. For coastal communities with limited access to fresh produce, sea kale was a crucial defense against scurvy. Forgetting about sea kale from our diet is like forgetting how to take free money. It's just sitting there, being delicious and nutritious while we ignore it. As sea kale faded into obscurity, another unusual plant faced its own identity crisis. This one is truly odd. It was primarily grown for blue dye, but medieval people also ate it. Unlike sea kale, which was purely a nutritional resource, woad lived a double life. The blue pigment extracted from woad leaves was used to dye everything from clothing to warrior paint. Before woad, finding blue clothing was about as rare as finding a quiet moment at a toddler's birthday party. Possible, but highly unlikely. The strange part? Young woad leaves were edible before they developed their dyeing compounds. Medieval farmers harvested these tender leaves for spring salads and soups. The flavor was mild, with a slight peppery kick, much like young mustard greens. Growing woad, however, was a smelly business. The process of extracting the blue dye involved fermenting the leaves, producing such an awful stench that royal decrees were made to prevent woad processing near important residences. It was the medieval equivalent of cooking, that one weird dish that makes your whole kitchen smell for days. While woad struggled with its identity as both food and dye, another humble vegetable part was being overlooked. While woad wrestled with its split personality, turnips suffered from people ignoring half their value. Everyone knows turnips, those unassuming root vegetables that fed countless medieval peasants. But what many don't realize is that medieval farmers valued the leafy greens just as much as the roots. It's like buying a smartphone and only using it to tell time. You're missing out on all the best features. Turnip greens contained 4 times more calcium, 3 times more vitamin A, and twice the protein of the roots. Medieval peasants carefully harvested the outer leaves throughout the growing season, taking care not to damage the developing root. These greens were a staple in soups, stews, and salads, adding a slightly peppery flavor to otherwise bland winter meals. Turnip greens deserve a comeback. They've been backstage for too long while the roots have stolen the spotlight. From skirret to turnip greens, these 15 forgotten vegetables show just how much we've lost touch with the foods that once sustained our ancestors.